This is the third video, Larry, really bringing recommendations to the table. We have provided an overview on gastroscopes that may
We
remain
did.
contaminated. You did an analysis, which we discussed in the second video, and noticed some safety signals around the air water nozzles and the cleaning and potential contamination of the air water nozzle on gastroscopes. But now we're going to talk
And
about what do we
colonoscopes.
do about it? What can we do about it? And that's a great point. The air water nozzle doesn't just exist on gastroscopes,
That's
just
exactly right.
happens to be the focus of this discussion
That's right.
is on gastroscopes. But that particular feature is on, colonoscopes as well as other varieties of scopes. So can you talk to us a little bit about what we can now do? Everybody's been following along on the YouTube series. They got the overview, they got your analysis, but let's really drill in. What is some advice that you have for our audience out there?
So that's what's most important. And whenever you get into this field and you start talking about safety signals, we've talked about them, and you start talking about adverse events, it's very important to point out what the adverse event is, of course. But part and parcel to that is to come up with recommendations to empower the listener so that they know what to do. You didn't just tell them there's a problem, you gave them actual meat and potatoes of how to solve this problem. So here are some recommendations to prevent contamination of the GI endoscope's air water nozzle. And I say GI endoscope because we're not just talking about gastroscopes, we're focusing on them, but this also includes colonoscopes as well. So the
What I
first thing.
love about this too, before you dive into it, is you've really broken this up into several parts and kind of understanding, what our audience might be, right? So we're going to start with healthcare providers, but then we're also going to be speaking to manufacturers as well as the FDA,
And the
which
FDA.
was where we really started the conversation in
That's
the
right.
last video was,
That's right.
and you ended the last video similarly saying just creating that awareness for the public was a big first step. So now let's speak directly to the healthcare providers, but just so everybody kind of knows, you've broken this out into all of the parties that are really involved in
Stakeholders. Right.
alerting and discussing safety signals.
Exactly. So I kind of partition my recommendations in my research, and I think it works here because I'm really talking to three audiences, not one. So the first one will be healthcare providers. So what we've done a really good job in these videos is notifying the healthcare worker to the problem. So we've done that. And we recommend to healthcare providers to make sure that the GI endoscopy unit and its staffers are aware of this infection risk. What infection risk again? Two-part. One is the potential for gastroscopes to expose patients to CRE, and then in particular, the design issue focusing on the air-water nozzle and the associated channel remaining contaminated after reprocessing. And why is it remaining contaminated? Well, we'll lead into a recommendation that will kind of it'll be self-explanatory. So another recommendation, in addition to making our listeners aware of this concern, we want to ensure and enhance the training and the education of reprocessing staff on the importance of proper cleaning of the GI endoscope's air-water nozzle. So we've talked about the potential for infection, and we want to also highlight the importance to make sure that staffers are educated and fully trained on the risks of this nozzle remaining contaminated and on how to actually clean the air-water nozzle, how to get rid of that foreign debris that may be lodged in or protruding from or blocking the air-water nozzle, causing the air-water system of the GI endoscope not to function properly. So, in addition to training staff on the proper cleaning and reprocessing of the air-water nozzle per the manufacturer's IFUs or instructions for use, another important recommendation is to flush water through the GI endoscope's air-water channel after each patient procedure. That is in the exam or procedure room. And we recommend that staff do that according, again, to the manufacturer's IFUs. This is very important because it can confirm for staff that that channel or that nozzle is not occluded. So by flushing water through it, you're able to dislodge debris and able to ensure that any debris that might have been there immediately after the procedure prior to the endoscope being shipped to the reprocessing room, you've already started to reduce the amount of bioburden on that scope. And the last really important recommendation, there's several, but we just want to focus on these today, is that management consider performing periodic reviews of these reprocessing practices in the GI endoscopy unit to confirm that the practices are adhering to the policies and procedures and that these policies and procedures are entirely consistent with the manufacturer's IFUs. Now that's a mouthful, but that's really important, and I think management understand exactly what I'm talking about. So we've now given recommendations, and there are many more, but we've given some important ones for healthcare providers. Now let's discuss some recommendations for manufacturers. Now, many of the listeners will be aware that the FDA, beginning in 2019, recommended that healthcare providers and manufacturers start transitioning away from the traditional duodenoscope. That's a third type of flexible endoscope we're talking about today, or a third type of GI endoscope. We've talked about colonoscopes, gastroscopes, and duodenoscopes, really covering the whole gambit of devices here. The recommendation to manufacturers is to consider maybe following the template that was used for reducing the risk of duodenoscopes remaining contaminated, which was the implementation of new designs, what we call more modern, more novel designs that include disposable components such as a single-use removable end cap. That was intended and prodded by the FDA so that the users could it would facilitate facilitate cleaning of the complex distal tip of the duodenoscope. Manufacturers of colonoscopes and gastroscopes might want to take a page out of that duodenoscope remedy and consider possibly how we can enhance the cleaning of that air-water nozzle at the distal tip of these GI endoscopes. So that's a bit of advice to the manufacturers. And then the third part here.
Well, and I'll add one other thing on that too. We discussed that as well. The disposable end caps in another series of videos. So I just want to kind of bring our audience into the fold that if this is the first video you're seeing or you're watching a snippet on LinkedIn or social media and just learning about the work that we're doing, all of this ties together in very interesting ways. And so some of those lessons learned with the disposable end caps is something that we've discussed, in prior videos as well. And so I just want to continue to make everybody aware that there's a very comprehensive conversation going on regarding device design, cleanability, and patient infection risk.
It's an excellent point. And I think one of the very unique features of these videos is we're not just talking about endoscope reprocessing or instrument reprocessing. We're not just talking about infection control, infection prevention, and risk management. We're adding something else, which is endoscope design. And that can get a little nerdy, so we're going to kind of dumb it down. But this is a all-inclusive conversation, and some subscribers and listeners may want to go back and should go back to one of our early videos where we talked about those disposable end caps of the duodenoscopes, 2 new adverse events associated with them, as well as some adverse events associated with bronchoscopes and the balloon used for the ultrasound EBUS endoscopes falling off. So whenever we have a disposable component on the end of any type of an endoscope, we have the concern of making the design such that those components do not fall off. But listeners can go back to those earlier videos and get more on that. So back to our recommendations. We had recommendations for the healthcare provider. We had recommendations to the GI endoscope manufacturers. And then we'll close this out with recommendations to the FDA that we hinted at earlier, which is that we recommend, I specifically have published this previously, recommending that the FDA consider, per precedent, notifying the public about the risk of gastroscopes exposing and potentially infecting patients with CRE and related multi-drug resistant organisms. Indeed, the FDA has done that in the last couple of years for urological endoscopes, bronchoscopes, and duodenoscopes. I recommend FDA consider doing it also for gastroscopes. I think it's a really important measure, step, and action to significantly improve patient safety. And then we're going to get to conclusions. And this is important. So if you missed or didn't or had limited time and didn't completely listen to the first or second video, please go back to them and listen to them. This is all really important information. You can contact us with any questions that you have. But let's summarize what we really talked today in this very comprehensive set of videos that we talked about. What are our conclusions in summary? Okay. Many recent FDA reports are discussing contamination of the GI endoscope's air-water nozzle, that is of the colonoscope and of the gastroscope. And we've provided measures to reduce this adverse event, and these measures include ensuring that staff are aware of this infection concern and are following the manufacturer's IFUs for cleaning the air-water nozzle. Just because it's a colonoscope doesn't mean it doesn't have to be clean. It does. And manufacturers, in summary, and to summarize our recommendations, manufacturers might consider some design enhancements, some more novel disposable components or design features that can simplify and enhance the cleaning of the air-water nozzle. And again, we talked about it, that we recommend that FDA consider increasing the public's awareness of the risk of gastroscopes in infecting patients, not necessarily just the air-water nozzle, but the whole design of the endoscope, particularly its distal tip, remaining contaminated. And we want to stress that it's not just duodenoscopes that are exposing patients to CRE and related multi-drug resistant organisms. That what we've talked about in this series are specific cases that have been linking gastroscopes to CRE as well, such as in the earlier video we talked about what are called NDM E. coli, or we can even encounter CRE in the Klebsiella family, or and we can even get these carbapenemase enzymes being produced by strains of Pseudomonas. So we have a lot of issues going on here, a lot of topics, a lot of good discussion, recommendations that empower you, the listener, to protect the patient.
Yep, and many more on the way. Great series on gastroscopes remaining contaminated. Larry, safety signals was my takeaway from this entire discussion of, and especially your analysis, the way that you go through those adverse event reports and try to identify trending and stay ahead of the curve. And that is something that all of our viewers can absolutely count on from these series of podcasts and YouTube videos that are being put out. So great job, Larry.
That's the cornerstone of our discussion, is to detect problems, concerns, risks that have not otherwise been publicized that we will publicize here, and that in time listeners will learn the importance of this because they will be able to look back and say that we were really ahead of the curve and we predicted this and talked about this, and now maybe the FDA is addressing it, but we will have talked about it months earlier.
Yeah, well, definitely make sure that you are subscribing to the Transmission Control Media podcast channel. You'll get these in audio form, or you'll find them on our YouTube channel as well. We're building quite a library of content, more videos to come. Thank you for joining us on this 3-part series with Larry and myself on contaminated gastroscopes and safety signals, which we specifically tied to air water nozzles. And stay tuned for more.